Well, just want to make sure we're all in the right room. The title of the session here is I Didn't Know You Could Do That in JavaScript, Building Powerful Solutions in Office 365. So that's the topic for this afternoon. How many people here are developers? Okay, that's good, quite a few. Wow. I didn't know there was that many developers here at the conference. That's pretty impressive. Good, so we're developers as well. So I feel good about that. It's really terrible when you're presenting about development to a bunch of salespeople. That's really not much fun at all if anyone's ever done that.
Yeah, it was going to be fun with my Visual Studio parts in there.
So great, let's do a bit of an introduction. So my name is Daniel McPherson, and shortly that will go to the next slide.
Shoot.
Wow, it's changing there, but it's not changing up there. There's always
something going wrong.
There's always something. This is amazing.
If it's not a beamer, it's a clicker.
All right, there we go. Still getting used to PowerPoint. So my name is Daniel McPherson. I've been working with Sharepoint for around about 10 or 12 years. I worked for Microsoft for 10 of those, mostly in Microsoft consulting services. I'm an Australian guy. I lived in London here for about 5 years, lived in Amsterdam for about 4, and lived in India for 1. And I run a small SharePoint consultancy company that just builds custom SharePoint solutions for larger enterprise companies. Roel.
My name is Roel Bethlehem. I'm a SharePoint architect for Rapid Circle, also a small SharePoint consultancy in the Netherlands. Basically been on the web ever since like 1996. Got into SharePoint around 2007. Haven't left it ever since. What else do I like? I like to play a bit of guitar. That's my big badass amp over there. Football, running, whatnot. So, and of course JavaScript as well.
Indeed. So, how many people here like JavaScript? Okay, that's actually probably a few more than I was expecting. How many people really like C#? Okay, so there's a bit of an overlap there, but actually the people that hate Java, or said they didn't like JavaScript, are often the C# guys, and vice versa. So I was really in that same camp, I guess, in that I'm a C# guy, and I didn't really much like this JavaScript thing. I was a bit of a JavaScript skeptic. I sort of thought JavaScript was this script kiddie type development language. You couldn't really do anything that powerful, and it was difficult to maintain, it was difficult to run. So I was a bit skeptical. Now, that's not to say that I didn't think that JavaScript had a place. In fact, if some of you have been to my sessions in previous years, I even managed to build a Twitter clone inside of SharePoint 2007 using JavaScript. So I did see some benefits in JavaScript, but I was still a skeptic about how much of the solutions I built would be written inside of JavaScript. So as a result, I was never particularly good at JavaScript. I still don't think I'm that good at JavaScript, by the way. But there was sort of a funny thing that I noticed over time. We do quite a bit of product development in my company. And about 3 years ago, when we started building some of those products, we looked at the sort of code base, and we found that we were writing maybe 80% C# and then 20% JavaScript. Well, over the 3 or 4 years we've been writing that software, we find now that the stuff we're building, it's almost got to 50-50. There's almost half of the solutions we build are JavaScript, and half of the solutions we build are C#. And so that's an incredible shift for me to see over the last 3 years. So the point is that it's probably not going to go back the other way. Probably we'll see over time that percentage will even swing in favour of JavaScript. So that's largely because of complementary technologies that are coming along, like CSS3 and HTML5, which obviously is where SharePoint 2013 is today. So probably that's why you're in the room. If you're not particularly a big fan of JavaScript, you're here because you want to start to see what this JavaScript thing is all about. So my job, I guess, really is to make us all fall in love with JavaScript by the end of this session. Let's just see how we go. So the interesting thing for me is sort of how did we get here? How do we end up getting to this place where JavaScript has become so important? And I guess there's really 4 things that I think are happening right now, which are putting enormous pressure on the SharePoint platform. And many of these are what we call classic inflection points, IT inflection points. And the amazing thing for me is that in the past, it's been incredibly difficult to deal with a single inflection point at a single time. Just ask IBM when we moved from the mainframe to the PC. Just ask Microsoft when we moved from the PC to the internet. But now, if I look at it, I can really see 4 pressures that are coming to bear. Now, they might not be big enough necessarily to call them inflection points, but they're certainly big enough to be very disruptive to a platform that we know and love, which is SharePoint. And all of these different pressures, all of them are, as a result, making JavaScript more and more important to have inside of our developer toolkits. So some of these words I've made up, okay? So when you go back home and you're playing Scrabble, don't try and use these words. But I think they sort of capture the meaning of what I'm trying to say quite well, so I used a little bit poetic license. But if we move in from the left, the first thing that I've seen, I think we've all seen, and probably we're all seeing right now in our hands, is this devicefication move. More and more, people aren't accessing web applications like SharePoint via the browser on their desktop. They're accessing via browsers on their tablets or on their phones, or even more, they're accessing via specific apps which are built specifically for the web applications that they're accessing. So devicefication has been, has had a huge impact on the way that we interact with IT services. And the other thing is that it's meant that we have to build web applications that are more responsive. And so there's been this whole movement around responsive UI. How do I build a UI that looks fantastic on a desktop, and at the same time that UI automatically tunes itself down to a device when we access it from, say, an iPhone or something like that? Well, the way we do these things is often using JavaScript techniques. It's using fancy CSS and HTML5. So the move towards the responsive UIs is moving us towards client-side technology like JavaScript. If we look at the next one, which is the consumerization of enterprise IT, again, this is a huge movement. I talked a little bit about it in my session on Monday, but the way I start to think about this is to put it in context of the bring your own device movement. Probably in your organizations, you've seen this happen, and that the CEO one day came in with an iPad, and all of a sudden, you could connect whatever device you want up to the networks in these corporations, and before that, you couldn't plug anything in unless it was authorized. So that's had a huge change. It's called a huge change on IT. Well, I can see a day where it's bring your own software as well, bring your own applications. Why should we stop at bring your own hardware? Actually, people should just be able to use the software they want that's sitting out there on the cloud as well. So there's certainly platforms like Asana, which you might not be aware of, which I think in many ways is competitive to SharePoint. And I think it's an amazing platform for collaboration. And there's also things like Basecamp, which probably you've already played around with, and you've probably seen customers that you have want to use Basecamp for their internal project delivery. So the thing about consumerization really is beauty. The applications we build inside of organizations, the bar that people expect, the expectation they have from these applications has gone through the roof. The stuff we build, it has to be really beautiful, because that's what the software that people are using when they get home and they fire up Facebook or whatever. They're using beautiful applications. And the way you create beautiful applications often comes down to using JavaScript and technologies like that. Nobody likes postbacks anymore. Okay, postback days are over, we can safely say. So the next one is the appification of everything. And we see this on the SharePoint platform. So obviously there's a SharePoint store now where you can go and download apps for SharePoint. Obviously it's still in its infancy. And also Google Play, which I think is a far more successful example of an app store that's out there today. But this is also going to be very disruptive to the way that we go and build software for our customers. The way I think about this is I would love to know collectively how much people have paid for us in this room to build the stock ticker web part or the weather web part. Okay, we've all built them, we've all been guilty of building them, okay? Those days are probably over, and I think that's a good thing. I certainly don't want to write another one, let's say that. What people will be able to do now is they'll be able to go and select from 17, 18, 20 different stock web parts from an app store and go and install it. So, the overall size of projects that we're building, I think we're going to see them going to decrease. And one of the things about the appification is that these apps are in some ways getting simpler, but also they're becoming more inexpensive. And again, JavaScript is a relatively inexpensive way to go and build these sorts of solutions, not only from a development point of view and an effort point of view, but also from an installation point of view and a maintenance point of view and a support point of view. So the final one I think you guys have probably all heard of, this little movement called the cloud. So that's obviously having a huge impact on SharePoint too. And there's a couple of good examples here that I think are firmly targeting SharePoint as a competitor, and that's Box.net and Dropbox. And I think these are sort of the competitors of the next generation for SharePoint, and that's 2013. And the key thing here is that you've got to be able to build very scalable solutions. And JavaScript is not necessarily a solution to scale in itself, But certainly what you see is that some of the processing that you used to do in C# running on top of servers, where you shift that processing back down onto the client, and you shift more of the workload back down onto the client. And in doing that with a web service-oriented design, these are techniques which have been proven through sites like Facebook and those sorts of things to be great ways to scale software and to build out software. So there's a lot of things going on right now. And I have to say, as an IT consultant, IT developer in the SharePoint space, I don't know where this is going. I really can't see where this is going. But I think one thing is really clear. JavaScript is going to be a big part of the future, whichever way you look at it. So there's another thing that I think is going on here, and that is that Microsoft doesn't really want us to be doing C# solutions on SharePoint anymore. And they're not going to necessarily say that outright, but there's some pretty clear messages that are coming through. I was at the SharePoint conference in Las Vegas last year, and there was not a single demonstration there at any of the events or any of the sessions which demonstrated the SharePoint object model. There was just none. Not a single line of code that was C# and the SharePoint object model was projected onto a screen there. Now that's, for me, a pretty strong message to say that Microsoft does not see C# and the SharePoint object model as being a strong and strategic direction forward for development on top of SharePoint. That doesn't mean it's going to go away overnight, okay? Don't get me wrong, and there's a real danger that what I'm saying here is going to be sort of taken as in, the sky's falling, running around with your hands up, and it's going to take a little time to happen, but that's clearly where Microsoft wants to go. Now, why do they want to do that? Well, one of the clear reasons why they want to do that is because Microsoft really wants all their customers in the cloud as well. I think Microsoft's seen the writing on the wall, and to be competitive in the future, their customers have to be in the cloud. Now, what's one of the barriers to getting their customers into the cloud? We are. We are firmly one of the reasons why our customers can't get to the cloud. And the reason is that we do such a fantastic job for our customers building these amazing business solutions as farm solutions in C#, which we then deploy onto boxes. So that's a problem. And it means that those solutions that are C# based, we can't move those up into the cloud. The sandbox, it didn't work. Okay, they tried. I think it's a fantastic case study on how not to architect a solution, a platform. I'd happily talk about that in more detail. I think it was never going to work, but it hasn't worked. And so the other alternative is, again, a move to JavaScript. Now, Microsoft wants to get to this 90-day release cycle. They want to get to a point where every 90 days there's a new version of SharePoint coming out and being installed. And what's stopping them, or what's a hindrance to that? Again, it's us. Because whenever we've deployed a farm solution, when the customer goes to upgrade, they have to test all of these solutions all over again. Microsoft is desperate to get out of this rhythm. Okay, they want to get us into this cloud world. They want to get us into this more agile release world. That's where they're heading. And again, this can be quite threatening to us, but it's in our own interests because this is going to happen whether we like it or not. We can sort of complain about it and say, but C# is so powerful, there's so many amazing things you can do. But unfortunately, the universe is indifferent to this. It's totally indifferent. And it was going to go this path anyway. We're going to the cloud whether we like it or not. So, look, there's quite a lot of silence here, isn't it? Everyone's like, oh man, what's going on here? It's going to get better, okay? This is not doomsday all the way through. So the result of this is really this massive platform developer earthquake. That's the way I sort of think about it. Is really everything's been shaken up. Everything's changing, and we're really going to have to adjust pretty quickly to this new world of development on SharePoint. Just want to emphasize though, C# on the server and the sandbox, it's not going to be going away immediately. And one of the things that Roel and I have been talking about quite a lot lately is even when we're building solutions completely compliant with the new way that Microsoft wants to do it, we still find ourselves having to go back to use the sandbox to achieve certain things. So there are still gaps, and that makes sense because this is the first time Microsoft tried to do this new JavaScript-centric model of development. There's still gaps, and you still have to fall back on the older technology sometimes to fill those gaps. They're both fully supported. So that's the other thing, is that just because it's not necessarily the strategic direction for Microsoft, they're fully supported, okay? I should be careful too, I don't speak for Microsoft, this is just my interpretation of what I'm seeing from them, so they might have a different view. So let's have a look at what we should be doing now then. So let's have a look at the cloud and what happens when we get to development inside of this cloud thing. Well, first of all, we still do SharePoint development. Absolutely. SharePoint is still a fantastic platform for building collaborative applications, web-based applications for our customers. There's no doubt about it. To SharePoint, we add Azure. We don't always add Azure. That's an optional extra. Azuras are great to add if there's things you need to do, things you would have done previously in a timer job, for example. Things you previously would have done in a service application, for example. And things where there's some heavy lifting involved. These are great places to sort of plug Azura in and complement the solution that you're building. And finally, you add JavaScript to do your development. And these things all combined, these are where we'll have to go to make that very happy customer, the very happy cloud customer that I think we all want to get to. So just to sort of get started, there's just some crazy stuff I wanted to show you in JavaScript. And most of the time, there's no real good reason for showing you this stuff. For me, it was just eye-opening a little bit about how powerful the JavaScript platform can actually end up being. So these are not necessarily things you're going to do inside of SharePoint, but let me just duck across to show you a couple of quick demos. It's not really scaling very well, is it? Let me just see if I can do that. Anyone remember this? Hands up if you remember this.
The good old days.
Excellent.
The good old days.
So it's been rewritten in JavaScript. Isn't that the good news? So you can run it. I don't remember an internet browser in Windows 3.1. Do you guys? I think they snuck that in. That's just to prove that this isn't really Windows 3.1 running here.
We tried to blue screen it as well, but we
didn't succeed.
No.
So here we go. We can even go to MS-DOS, and we can even go directory. All right, there we go. Like I said, this isn't really going to amaze your customers when you're building SharePoint solutions, but I thought it was quite funny to do that. So I've got another demo over here. All right, there's another one. Yeah, this one here I think is really interesting, actually. So everyone knows that Flash is dead, okay? That happened, well, Steve Jobs killed it, basically. So there's always been this big thing, how do we get Flash to run on top of iPhones and all of that? Well, someone had a really good idea. How about we write Flash inside of JavaScript? And so that's actually what you're seeing here. This is if you go to the source and go view source, which over here, then what you'll see is that actually it's just a bit of JavaScript, and you're passing into the JavaScript the SWF file. And passing that in, it'll then take that SWF file and convert it into running as JavaScript. That's pretty fancy. Now, it's not there yet. It's not going to do video. Okay? There's going to be some limits on what can be done here. But again, it just illustrates just how powerful some of the solutions are that you can build inside of JavaScript. So we might have Flash on the iPhone yet, just in time for no one to publish them. We've got a Commodore 64 emulator. So there we go. Scrolling down here. All right, that familiar with anyone?
Gallagher.
I can't. Yeah, you can play Gallagher if you want to. I can't remember any commands, but we're running Commodore 64 here. And finally, I've got one more just to show you some of the graphic stuff that you can get. We've got like a little tunnel thing here, which is pretty nice as far as graphics are concerned. Again, we're not going to be building graphics like this for our customers, but you can do this in JavaScript, which for me, I think, that was amazing to think you'd be able to do this sort of stuff just 3 years ago. And finally, one more demos over here. So this one here is, I think the graphics here are really, really sleek. So you can see I can just do stuff like that, which is pretty nice. Yeah, I think the thing here is that there's a very big company now that's very, very motivated to get us to do really powerful things inside of JavaScript, and that's obviously Google. So they're really putting a lot of weight behind rapidly improving HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript and the engines behind it. So let me just go back to my deck. Okay. So this is probably how you feel about JavaScript. I know that this is how I felt about JavaScript. It was a great way of building spaghetti, really. So you've got your JavaScript down here, and there you have a meatball. So it doesn't have to be like this, though. And I think this is the one misconception that you should take away from this room, is that you shouldn't be writing JavaScript that looks like spaghetti. And there's no good reason for writing JavaScript that looks like spaghetti. There are some really fantastic frameworks that are out there today to help you write very maintainable and very supportable source code inside of JavaScript. So we're going to go through a couple of those, especially the sorts of frameworks that I think you should be looking at if you're about to embark on a JavaScript project using SharePoint. So the first one is jQuery. And jQuery is built on top of JavaScript, so it's a library built in JavaScript. And, well, it does a lot of things. It's really a utility for your tool belt for your JavaScript developer. I think one of the best ways to think about it is it's kind of a programmatic CSS. What it allows you to do is quickly access objects inside of the DOM and then do stuff with it. And there's an enormous third-party network around it. There's a lot of plugins that you can use to do all sorts of fancy things. It's how you get all these wonderful sliders that are around on the internet. And almost any UI element you want to try and do, somebody's probably done it, and there's something you can grab, a plugin you can grab to put it into your jQuery and get that effect that you're looking for. So it can even make some of us in the room designers. Maybe, not me. So it's a pretty amazing framework. It's also shipped with the Microsoft platforms. So this is a fully supported Microsoft library. It's not like a hacky thing you pull off the internet and away you go. It's a fully supported Microsoft library. They love this thing. So next one is the SharePoint JavaScript object model, which I think is obviously the first stop for us when we start to build SharePoint solutions. And you'll interact between jQuery and the SharePoint JavaScript object model. It's a pretty nice object model. For those of us who've done C#, there's lots of things that will be very familiar to us. It's quite a relatively simple ramp to go up and do it. It's a pretty smart library, so I've done a lot of things to make sure that the payload that you deliver from the server down to the browser is kept as small as possible. And also make sure that when you're transmitting requests across the wire, those are also kept to a minimum. So it's a pretty powerful library to go and get across. And if you're doing stuff with SharePoint, you should probably be using the JavaScript object model to go and do it. So the next one is something that we've really only started to dip our toes in the water on, and that's this thing called Typescript. How many people have heard of Typescript? Is that sort of broadly known? Okay. How many people are using Typescript? Yeah, not many. Only a few, see? I haven't done much with it myself, but the guys in my team, they went through it pretty thoroughly, and they're really impressed with it. They think it's fantastic. The most important thing to consider about Typescript is that, they talk about it as being a different language, but really it is just JavaScript. And what it does is just layer on top of JavaScript a few shortcuts, if you like, that mean that you can write JavaScript in a more object-oriented way. So you write JavaScript in a way which is more familiar to us as C# developers. At the end of it, what you do with TypeScript is you actually compile it down to JavaScript. So in the end, you end up with just plain old JavaScript, which you can then go and debug and do all those fantastic things with it. And this is an interesting movement that's sort of happening across the web as a whole. JavaScript, if you like, is kind of the assembly of the web. It's kind of like the assembly language of the web. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that we write stuff in C# and then it goes through the IL, and then eventually we get assembly somewhere along the lines. We write in this higher level of language and then it gets compiled down to assembly at the very end of the line. None of us write in assembly, but we all end up producing assembly through the work that we do. Well, that's kind of the way a lot of things are working now with JavaScript, in that you will write to a higher level language, a language, maybe a domain-specific language, and that will compile down to JavaScript for you. And I think it's actually a really powerful thing, that a movement that's happening, because it means that we can fix finally some of those really horrible little design decisions that the JavaScript developers or the originators created, and it means we can innovate faster on top of JavaScript. So TypeScript for me is one of the primary examples of how you can write these higher languages which then compile down to JavaScript. So I would really recommend taking a look at it as Microsoft developers. The next one's been around for quite a while, which is called SP Services. If we were on 2010 or 2007, this was really the most amazing library to have at our disposal for building JavaScript solutions. And Mark Anderson is a fantastic guy, and he's done a lot of work on this library. Basically what it did is it's a jQuery plugin for the SOAP web services from SharePoint. Now, those have been depreciated in SharePoint 2013, and really the JavaScript client object model is replacing a lot of what SharePoint services used to do, but there are still a few things where the SP Services framework comes in handy. So the specific ones where it comes in handy is when you need to do a cross-site query, so you need to get data from a different site collection, or whether you'd like to query a list anonymously. Those two things are very difficult to do using the new JavaScript object model that comes with SharePoint 2010. So you might have noticed, I've sort of considered these three here as being essential. Okay, add those to your toolkit, absolutely. I think this is non-essential. You might use it if you've got those specific requirements. CoffeeScript is just one I'm throwing in there because it's another example of a TypeScript-like language. And it's sort of, I guess, a more community-focused one rather than being a Microsoft-driven one. You might want to take a play with it. It's, again, very similar to JavaScript. It's a JavaScript-like language, but it just cleans up a lot of the really crappy aspects of JavaScript, which I think probably frustrated a lot of the people here in the room. So it might be one you want to look at, if you want to sort of steer away from some of the Microsoft proprietary technologies. This next one is really interesting for me because CSS has always baffled me, and it's called less. And it's along the same lines again as TypeScript, in that what you do is you write your CSS in the less language, and then compile it, and you compile it down to CSS. So the sort of things that it does, which I think are really nice, is it lets you, when you're doing your styles, you can actually nest all your styles together, which sort of makes sense for us as developers. You can use variables for colors and put them all through your CSS. Again, I think these are really fantastic things and a really great way of making sure your CSS is more accurate at the end of the day. So that might be another one worth checking out. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Roel, who's far more advanced in his JavaScript than I am and has more experience in a lot of these libraries.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Basically, there's loads of libraries out there. The one I really like is Kendo UI, which has a lot of UI stuff like grids, graphs, and so on. Data binding, because it took quite a while for Microsoft to figure out data binding, but how are you going to do it in JavaScript? So say bind my data set to a grid. You don't really want to go for each. Kendo UI takes care of that, but there are other things as well, like Knockout does the same thing. Knockout does data binding for you, so you can go there, and there's a lot of frameworks there actually. So you need to ask yourself what frameworks you want to learn, because there are a couple out there, and you're not going to be able to learn every framework, and some are overlapping. So from a company point of view, always go for a best of, what I call a best of suite. So I just buy a framework, like you buy Telerik. Kendo UI is actually owned by Telerik, so just buy that, and then you have good documentation, and you learn everything. As a developer, I also noticed that sometimes you just want to experiment around. Throw a couple together, like Knockout, do something with Backbone, do a bit of jQuery plots for data visualization. But then you have to learn all those 3 different things, and that can be complicated, and you have to invest some time in it. But at least it doesn't cost any bucks that you have to spend, because you can just download them. So.
I think one of the interesting things about these frameworks, and it's one thing we're talking about a lot internally, is that we sort of do development now, because that's the way it's moving, from devices right through to Azure. And so the nice thing is that we don't want to have a massively diversified skill set. We don't want Java, Objective-C, C#, JavaScript. We want to try and simplify the way we build solutions across all of those platforms. So we're sort of looking at Mono on the devices, which is a C#, it's the .NET framework for devices, basically. And you can build that using C# and the MVC pattern to do your applications. Then you can come over to JavaScript, and you can use one of these to do an MVC pattern with JavaScript. Then you can move up to Azure, and you can do C# using the MVC pattern. And so even though you're working on all these different disparate platforms, you're actually still keeping the skill set that you use to develop them relatively small. And so you can become obviously more expert in using those. So I think that's why pick your framework properly, but standardize on these frameworks in a way that give you that versatility and move across all these different platforms that we have to build on today. Platforms are sort of fracturing again rather than simplifying down.
Yeah, and it can be pretty intimidating if you take over from someone, take somebody's code over, and it's like hundreds of lines of JavaScript code, and if you never use the framework that you have to work with, then all of a sudden it can be pretty intimidating, and there's a steep learning curve there. So that's why we try to keep frameworks the same, so make some kind of convention what frameworks we're using, because otherwise it's very hard to give code to another person. So
what we're going to do now is jump into Sharepoint and give you a bit of a demo. Now, we had some, as a developer audience, you'll hopefully appreciate this. We had to do a few sort of acrobatic tricks to get this demo to work properly, because Roel is running Unix, and he had a problem with the projector. So we're actually having to run TeamViewer on my machine to connect to his machine so that he can do the demo across on my machine. Make sense? Okay, and it disconnected, I think, while we were talking. Yes, it did. So let me just connect to partner again.
Partner.
This is where it doesn't connect, right?
Always something goes wrong.
Yeah.
They say Murphy was an optimist.
It's not actually connecting, is it? Oh, my battery's got 10% left on my battery as well.
Okay, better plug it in then. So.
Wow. It's not connecting, is it?
Let me just go down here.
We've got a plan B, okay? If it doesn't connect, we do have a plan B. Someone from the audience comes up and does a demo. Okay.
Let's see.
Shall I try again?
Yeah, try again.
All right. It's not working?
No, I can't see.
That is really strange, isn't it?
It says you're connected to me, but
Really?
it's not showing.
Wow. How long do we give it, do you reckon?
I can close the connection and
close the connection.
restart TeamViewer.
Yeah, let's do that. They're getting restless, we don't have much time.
Yeah.
All right, we might go to my demo then and come back.
Yeah.
All right, what we'll do is we'll skip forward. This is the plan B. Okay, we're now firing off plan B. So what I'm going to do instead, the demo is going to get a little bit out of order. What I wanted to show you is a solution that we built using entirely JavaScript. So there's no C# code or anything like that. And it's, you wouldn't necessarily know that it's SharePoint. So it was done for a customer of ours. And the objective we had was they wanted to give SharePoint to kids. Okay, so I'm talking about students inside of a school between the ages of sort of, I guess, 8 to 12 or something like that. Because obviously SharePoint isn't really friendly for kids between years of 8 to 12. It's not even friendly for me some of the times. So actually I prefer this new interface we built. But I think it's got some really nice elements there of all the things that we've talked about. And I think it shows that you can still build really amazing solutions just using JavaScript. So what I've got over here is the landing page for the application. So let me just make sure that's going to refresh, which there it goes. So this is the home page. Yeah, this is like going to default.aspx inside of SharePoint, only for kids. So you can imagine that there's kids in a class. They've just started their year at school, and one of the courses they've got is computers, and also they want to keep track of the other students in the class and do some work and all that stuff. So just talk you through a couple of the elements pretty quickly. First of all, down here we've got the teacher. So there's a photo of the teacher, and actually the photo changes as you go through the day. So you can see over here you've got your all the different courses you've got for the day. It knows what time it is of the day, and it will change the teacher's picture based on the lesson that you're in. On top of that, it's got the feedback as well. So when you do work, there's like a very basic sort of workflow in it, and that manages the feedback you get from students to the teacher, and the most recent feedback gets displayed over here. Down here you've got the other students in your class, so you can see all the other kids in the class. Hover over their picture and you get to know their name, which is quite handy at the start of term. Right here in the middle, we've got a quick message from the teacher. So if the teacher's got some message, they can communicate that by doing a little quick update that just pops through in the middle. And then above that, you've got what day it is, and obviously the lessons that you've got ahead to look forward to as a student. So beyond that then, what we've done is we broke out sort of 4 of the key features from SharePoint, which we thought would be useful for kids. And so the first one is words, which is obviously like an online word processor, is typing. Then we have lists, which is the SharePoint lists. Often they use Excel for this today inside of classes, but lists are actually quite a nice alternative because they're often just sort of tables. Drawing pictures, and then activities, which I'll come to last. So the first one to go to is to this words link. So I'm just going to click on words. Now obviously SharePoint has this Office web app thing, which is fantastic, but at the moment there's no SDK, so you can go in there and sort of simplify the Office web app, the Word Office web app. So what we did instead is we built something using a JavaScript plugin called TinyMCE. And it's free, you can download it, and what it does is allow you to write rich text format documents online in a browser, much like this. A couple of other things we're just going to point out as I go. When we designed it, we thought about how it would work on tablets, particularly on the Microsoft Surface. So what you'll see is we've sort of simplified some of the features and put them down the left and the right so that when you're holding it, your thumbs sort of hover over those buttons to make it easy to go and get access to. So there's some of the sort of beautification, I guess, you have to do when you're doing devicefication in the cloudification. Does that make sense? So I'm going to sound like a sales guy if I keep this up, aren't I? So from there, the student can just go and type. So it's just a matter of going in here, following the instructions. They can do things like hover and change the color. I mean, you're not really missing out on much here. Everything you typically want to do inside of a word processor, you can go and do. You can also print, copy, paste, all those things are available there on the left-hand side. When I'm done, all I need to do is click on the go back button. And I think it just blocked the pop-up. But anyway, all you do is go back, and because we're running in the cloud, it'll automatically save that document for us. Now, because you might be thinking, Daniel, I've seen no evidence whatsoever that this is actually SharePoint behind the scenes, and you're developers and you're very skeptical about these things, and you've seen people fake demos all the time, I'm going to prove to you that this is real SharePoint behind the scenes. So click on the link here, you'll see SharePoint. You see that there's no document in there. Now, if we refresh, we should see that a document has automatically been created inside of this library. There it is, my word. And it should have been a few seconds ago. Okay, you can't fake that stuff, all right? So the nice thing about this too is that it's RTF, and so you can open up in Word. So as the kid graduates through school, all of a sudden they can start to use the more powerful Word application to do all of this editing. And that's something else we tried to do through the entire application. Okay, so let's go back and have a look at lists. So lists is something that the teacher can actually create activities for. So for example, you might ask your students to create a list of dinosaurs on their own. Now the standard SharePoint list stuff is a bit too sophisticated, so we tried to simplify it down. But we also wanted a teacher who could deal with sophistication of SharePoint to be able to create these lists on their own. So all they do is create a standard list template and put it in a certain place, and then that will get added to this list of activities that the student can do. So if we go across to the dinosaurs section, and the connection is a little bit slow, so sorry for that, then it'll pop up here, and what we get is a standard SharePoint list soon. There it is. So what I can do is I can edit that, just like you normally would, or I can even create a new list item. So clicking on that, it's working on it, and we should see a list that pops up in a second. So this is all standard, again, standard SharePoint functionality behind the scenes. We've just hidden a lot of that sophisticated functionality. There's also an export button you can see down here on the right-hand side. If you click on that, it'll export it out to Excel. So again, there's another example of how the child can graduate into these more advanced products just to get more out of their IT experience. So there we go, there's the list. I'm going to go back again. Next one I'll show you is going to be the picture. So I'll go back once more. And what we have here is the pictures. So, oops, I did it a bit quickly. That's all right, we'll fix that bug later. So here's a picture. And again, this is where JavaScript is really good. It would have taken ages for us to build that ourselves. But all you do, look online, there's a fantastic community of open source products out there. You can just grab these off the shelf and plug them in, literally plug them into your HTML, and you've got this functionality. So this is an online paint type program. So obviously kids can come in here and start drawing and go crazy, do whatever they want. They can change the colors. They can do all sorts of amazing things. So that's all there. And they can save it, or here we're saving it. So that will actually save it as a ping file, I think, back into a picture library inside of SharePoint, which is quite nice. So the last one I think is really also quite interesting. It's called the activity section. And so at the moment we've only got one activity, but you can build these sorts of games for the kids in just 1 or 2 days. It's very quick to go and build a very small JavaScript game for kids to go and play. So this is the first one we built, and you can imagine a library of these things that you can go and put together. And so all the kid has to do is identify where the foot, the leg, the hand, the head, and the arm go. Now, I'm intentionally getting this wrong, okay? This is the demo of it not working, all right? So I'm just going to go put the arm to the head, and we should see, that's the wrong place. But if I get it correct, and I put, now that's definitely going to be the arm, it should stay. So there it is. And obviously we can do that to the head, and off we go. So really quick and simple stuff. Like I said, our developers built this in just 1 or 2 days, and you can just add them into the site and light up all these new activities for the kids to play around with. So that's quite interesting. So overall, after doing this project, and it's all running on SharePoint 2013, it did work on 2010 as well, I got really excited about the sorts of solutions that we can actually go out there and start building for our customers. I used to feel like JavaScript there'd be shortcuts, there'd be shortfalls, there's things we couldn't do. But after going through this, I think actually JavaScript just makes the sort of solutions we can build much more powerful. So Rohan, you ready to try it again?
Yeah, I'm ready to try it again. The network is really slow, so that's why we're having trouble to connect, I think.
Oh, really?
I've got a different ID for you now, so can you put that one in?
Who am I connecting to then?
I don't know.
Okay.
Not me.
Okay.
So here's my
320.
330.
647.
No, 330.
Okay.
647.
Yep.
630.
Yep. All right. This is where we have to give the password out to everyone in the audience. There's some guy in the back who's going to connect as well and start playing with our demo, isn't it?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, and then 2J.
Yep.
AN.
Yep.
36.
36. All right. Okay.
Seeing something. Uh-oh.
There we go.
All right. There we are.
Okay.
Let's jump in here. I've got basically two things here. First up is a SharePoint app. So who's here already developed a SharePoint app? So not so many. If you set up your VM correctly, your development environment correctly, so you basically can start developing SharePoint apps. And what I'm going to show here is actually a SharePoint hosted app. So I'm going to use JavaScript to basically pull out of SharePoint which sites I'm following. So basically, in SharePoint 2013, I can follow sites, which is part of the social experience of SharePoint 2013. So I built a small site, a small SharePoint app, which is going to show you like how that's done. So one of the first things I'm doing, so still seeing something different here.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, it's not coming through. Basically, the first thing you do is set up an HTML page that's going to hold your, that's going to hold your UI. So, and basically, I will tie in with JavaScript through a jQuery template. Basically, when I do a REST call against SharePoint, because we can do REST calls now, I can basically ask SharePoint, like, which sites am I following? So I hope this is coming through. No, it's not refreshing.
I reckon we should bail. Let's just bail on it. It was definitely far too complex to do it on stage. It was never going to work.
Yeah.
All right, let's just play our one, guys. We won't torment you with a broken demo. It was really amazing, though. Okay, if anyone asks.
Yeah. Come over to my to me.
All right, so we'll plow forward. Let's see. This is your slide.
Yeah, this is my slide. So basically, what I was talking about, which I wanted to show you, was that you can do different things. You can basically use JavaScript in SharePoint apps, which is the prime thing that comes with SharePoint 2013. What we could already do with SharePoint 2010 was I can use JavaScript on my master page and my page layout and do stuff there. What's new with SharePoint 2013 is also the script editor web part. So basically, if I have a bunch of JavaScript, and I can put it in a web part now, I put it in a script editor web part. Actually, you could do something similar in SharePoint 2010 as well, if you use the HTML forms web part, funny enough. But now we have the script editor web part. And the last thing that I've come across is display templates. And what is actually a display template? If you have like a, for example, search, we can basically, the search results, we can show them in a different way by using a display template. Well, same we did, for example, if we queried a list. We could use, in SharePoint 2010, XSLT. Now we have display templates where we can use JavaScript to put, basically give a different rendering to what we want to show the user. So, who here loved XSLT? You like to torment yourself, people. Yeah, but I found it hard to debug. So if something went wrong, for example, with an XSLT, it came down like, oh, it didn't work. Oh, what didn't work? That was very hard to see. So that whole experience got a lot better, I think, with display templates because it actually shows you what's going wrong. You still sometimes have to go back a bit old school, like saying like alert this and this in JavaScript, so you can pop up what the state of a variable is. It's a bit harder, but this display templates, and one of the demos I have on there, which I can't show you, actually shows a refiner in SharePoint Search. And what a refiner is in SharePoint Search is if you have a search result, you have your search results here, and basically you have your refiners next to it. And if you click on a refiner, say for example, refine by file type, and you, for example, you do PDF, you just go down to all the search results that just show you PDF. What I wanted to show you was that you can basically put JavaScript in there, get some visualization framework like jQuery plot, and put a chart, a pie chart in there. So for example, then you can show like, well, 50% of your search results were Word documents and 10% was PDF. And if you click on one of the pies, it actually shows you basically the refined results. So this is a couple of ways that you can actually make SharePoint work even better using JavaScript. And I think it's absolutely awesome, and it's a great experience. And I really wanted to show you what it would look like, but unfortunately we're being
You'll have to put it on your
by-
blog afterwards or something.
Yeah, I put it on my blog, so yep. There's a couple of gotchas which you have to learn when you start using JavaScript. And the one that bite me the most was actually cross-domain. Because one of the things that you cannot do in JavaScript, when you do, say for example, an Ajax call, and say like, oh, get me stuff from another site collection. Say for example, go to a list in a different site collection. That's actually a cross-domain call. Same if you do, for example, SharePoint app. If you want to go to what's called the app web, so basically that's the web in which, the SharePoint web in which your app lives, and you want to go and say query a list in the host web, is actually cross-domain call. Well, of course, Microsoft thought about it as well and actually gives you a method to execute a cross-domain call. But as soon as you go to a different domain, it won't work. This actually bit me when I was doing some app that showed some navigation. Showed some navigation on the page. And then the customer said, oh, I also want to see it in the My Sites. And the My Sites were in a different domain. It doesn't work then anymore. So you have to watch out with that cross-domain call. And also the funny thing is, you don't really get warned for it. You just get a 404, saying like, oh, I couldn't find it. So it just, what jQuery does, it just drops it silently. You also have to watch out with security and authentication, because we're doing everything in the client. It basically runs in your identity. There's no such thing as elevation there. So I can't, for example, do all kinds of administrative stuff just because the user that's running it doesn't have that privilege, and I can't basically amplify my security. I can't say, run this as an administrator, which we could do in SharePoint 2010, and we still can do in the SharePoint object model, is by basically elevating my security privileges. The other thing that bit me was timer jobs. So if I have a SharePoint hosted app and I need the user to come to the page, and then I can do something. I can't say like, hey, I want this to execute every day at 11 o'clock. That won't work with a SharePoint hosted app, and you have to think of something differently. You can't do it with JavaScript. You have to register somewhere that you want to fire this job every day. So if you're coming from the SharePoint object model, where you could create a timer job, that won't work in a SharePoint hosted app. Of course, you can go to an what's called an Azure hosted app, auto-hosted app, or a provider-hosted app. Of course, you can register a job to fire there with client-side object model, which is a different API in SharePoint 2013, and do it from there. But with JavaScript, it's going to be hard. Also, watch out for dependencies. So if you use a couple of frameworks, what I actually had, and which one of the harder things of JavaScript, is because variables in different frameworks are named the same, they can collide. So, and then all of a sudden, you have the same variable defined in two different JavaScript files, and you're thinking like, hey, what's going on? Why does it have this value? Because JavaScript all puts it basically in one bucket, the document, the window object. So you have to watch out for that stuff. The thing I'm going to say about it, it's just like guitar playing. I like to play guitar. I can't learn to play guitar from a book. So you have to do it. You have to go out there, have to practice it, and then you'll probably run into these problems and you know when to avoid them. So that's a couple of gotchas for you, and I hope will help you along the road.
I think my JavaScript looks about as good as my guitar would sound, I think.
That's right.
At the moment. So look, we've done this demo, and so actually this brings us pretty much to the end of the session. I think there's no way out of this. So for the hands that went up at the start that sort of weren't big fans necessarily of JavaScript, there's no way out. It's the future. It's going to be a very significant part of a SharePoint developer's skill set. And so the sooner we embrace it, then the better, I think. Look, thanks very much for coming along to the session. Hopefully that's been quite useful to you. And we'll be hanging around here at the end if you've got any questions or anything more like that. So thanks, folks.